Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Downing Street has denied that the resignation of the Prime Minister's most senior black advisor is linked to yesterday's controversial report into racism in the UK. Samuel Kasumu has been central to Number 10's links with minority communities. Earlier, the Prime Minister was asked about Mr Kasumu's decision to step down.
Well, I worked very closely with Samuel in the last year or so, and he's done some great stuff, and I thank him very much, particularly on helping to encourage vaccine take-up amongst more hesitant groups and communities. And actually, we're seeing some real success there. And although it is true that different groups have been coming forward at different paces, everybody is increasing their take-up. So I thank him very much for that.
Our political correspondent, Rob Powell, has the latest from Westminster. This is his report.
Ahead of Boris Johnson doing that interview there, they released a statement, Downing Street did, in which a spokesperson said that Mr Kasumu has played an incredibly valuable role, during his time at Number 10. As he previously set out, he'll be leaving government in May. This has been his plan for several months and has not changed. Any suggestion that this decision has been made this week or that it's linked to the CRED, the race report, is completely inaccurate. Now, back in February, actually, Samuel Kasumu did have his resignation letter that he'd written to the Prime Minister leaked to the media. He had intended on resigning back then and set out a timeline whereby he would go by the end of May. We were then told, though, the media was told that actually Mr Kasumu, you can see there during the Brexit campaign, that he changed his mind, that he decided to stay after conversations with ministers. But interestingly, now Number 10 pointing back to that timeline that was apparently withdrawn, actually in that letter as well, Samuel Kasumu was pretty critical of some elements of how the government and Number 10 handled issues around race, accusing the Tory party or suggesting that the Tory party were pursuing a politics steeped in division. Now, we haven't heard anything from him today directly. He's a special advisor, so generally you don't hear anything from them on the record anyway. Labour peer, though, Lord Boateng, who was the first black cabinet minister back in 2002 under Tony Blair, he suggested that he thought Samuel Kasumu may have gone because of the scale of the task and the impact that was having on him. This is what he said.
And the chaos that seems to be emerging in the heart of government with the resignation, the disappearance from Downing Street of Mr Kasumu, it doesn't inspire confidence. He's apparently mentally and physically exhausted. Well, yes, fighting racism is, I can tell him, a mentally and physically exhausting process, but it has to be done.
And that's maybe the risk here. We know that Samuel Kasumu did have some concerns about how government was operating, and we do know that the management, if not the whole report of the report released yesterday, if not the whole report itself, has caused considerable tension around this issue. And I think the danger is that it leaves people thinking that the government isn't taking this very serious and important issue as seriously as it should be.
Rob Powell there.
Boris Johnson's most senior black advisor has quit as ministers face a backlash over yesterday's highly controversial report on racism. Samuel Kasumu, special advisor for civil society and communities, will leave his role next month. Downing Street insists his departure isn't linked to yesterday's review. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Samuel Kasumu.
He may not be a household name, but Samuel Kasumu, seen here back in 2016, introducing Boris Johnson during the EU referendum campaign, had a key role advising him on race. Somewhat awkwardly, it was revealed today that he's quitting, just hours after a controversial report suggested institutional racism was a thing of the past.
It doesn't look good, does it?
Well, I worked very closely with Samuel in the last year or so, and he's done some great stuff.
We know change needs to happen and that it's hard to trust some institutions and authorities.
This video to encourage vaccine take-up among black people was part of his work, but he'd also reportedly been unhappy with what he called the politics of division. Today, the Prime Minister acknowledged deep-rooted problems.
There are very serious issues that our society faces to do with racism that we need to address. We've got to do more to fix it.
A Number 10 spokesman was adamant today that Mr. Kasumu's decision to leave had nothing to do with yesterday's controversial report on race. To suggest otherwise, he said, was completely inaccurate. But others, including the opposition, are far from convinced.
To have produced a report that denies the existence of institutional racism, downplays the experience of millions of people across this country, and appears to glorify the slave trade, it cannot be a coincidence that they've lost their key advisor over this.
But had the Prime Minister's commitment to do more reassured campaigners?
Boris Johnson's just said water's wet, really and truly. What he hasn't done is dived into the fact that why is there a problem, how is this problem being handled, and what things are in place that have caused this problem to arise.
Certainly losing a key advisor on race is unlikely to ease tensions that led to last summer's angry protests. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
Now, Downing Street has insisted that the departure of its most senior black advisor, Samuel Kasumu, has nothing to do with the hostile reception to yesterday's government-backed report on race. Some of the academics thanked in the report for their participation have today insisted they were not involved in writing it. And there's been a warning from some doctors that its findings could actually put ethnic minority lives at risk. Our political correspondent, Liz Bates, has this report.
If yesterday was the unveiling, today was the unravelling. This government-commissioned race report has, in less than 24 hours, caused a race row. This morning, it was revealed that the Prime Minister's most senior black advisor, Samuel Kasumu, had quit. Number 10 said he'd been planning to leave for months. Others close to him said his resignation was related to the report. Government Minister Gillian Keegan gave her off-the-cuff response to the news in a radio interview.
Samuel Kasumu, Number 10 Special Advisor for Civil Society, resigned on the day that the report came out. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't even know who he is.
I want to see what your standards of filling that bed up are like.
When the Prime Minister was asked about it a few hours later, he had at least heard of him.
Well, I worked very closely with Samuel in the last year or so, and he's done some great stuff, and I thank him very much.
The Race Commission was set up in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement to look into racial inequalities in Britain. But it was widely condemned when it found no evidence of structural racism, instead blaming disparities on economics, geography and culture. And today, even some contributors named in the report itself were distancing themselves from it. One asked for his name to be removed. Another, Stephen Bourne, said he had no knowledge of the report, having only attended one meeting at Number 10.
I never consented to it. I was never consulted about it. And the more I thought about it overnight and this morning, the more angry I became. People are just going to see your name there and associate you with a damaging report. And I had nothing to do with it.
Criticism also came from senior medics via a searing takedown published in the British Medical Journal.
It should not be addressed as a independent report on ethnic disparities, because the lives of ethnic minorities are far more important than party political issues. If this report is going to inform government policy, then that will lead to not just a worsening health inequalities, but also putting many more lives at risk of death and serious harm.
The report's conclusions were thought to be in line with Number 10's own stance, with similar views having been expressed previously by Policy Chief Munira Mirza and Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch. But following the backlash, even the Prime Minister seemed to be backing away.
Look, this is a very interesting piece of work. You know, I don't say the government's going to agree with absolutely everything in it.
Number 10 says it will now look at the report's recommendations and consider its response.
Liz Bates reporting. Well, now, earlier I spoke to the former Metropolitan Police Superintendent Leroy Logan. He was the first chair of the National Black Police Association. I began by asking him for his reaction to the conviction of PC Ben Hannum and how his extreme views were not spotted.
Like everything, it's down to the quality of vetting and also the supervision and leadership. If that officer's supervisors are really observing that individual as a probationer and going on to any form of development, they should be picking up the signs. And I think what it's showing to me, that the sort of moral compass of the police culture has shifted to the right. We've seen that in society. We've seen that in the public through Brexit. It emboldened a lot of people's views and values and felt that they could be more racist in their thinking or very extreme in their ideology. And the police service is a reflection of society. And so these sort of individuals who stick out like a sore thumb a few years ago are not sticking out as much as they used to.
But does this mean that since you were in the force, there really has been a decided shift in the Metropolitan Police?
I really do think so, John. I have seen the look and feel of policing to remind me of a pre-McPherson era. There doesn't seem to be that real sort of grip that sergeants and inspectors and supervisors used to have. I remember my sergeant, my reporting sergeant, was around me like a rash. You know, I couldn't budge without my reporting sergeants telling me, no, this is how we do it. And they were very hands-on prescriptive. They are not that prescriptive now because they've got higher caseload of officers to deal with. They've got other supervisory requirements. And so the day-to-day leadership on the street is almost non-existent. And inside the station, there's so many officers that the sergeant has to deal with that they're not really examining those officers as they should.
Where does this fit in your concerns about race disparity?
You know, when you've got someone with extreme right-wing views in the organization that long, shows to me that the whole issue of race inequality is no longer really an agenda item. In fact, it's not even in the boardroom anymore. The organization has made it clear that institutional racism is not an issue, all is well in the organization, and people know that's not the case. So they're undermining people's intelligence to say, oh, everything's fine. And we've seen the disparities in stop and search and the use of force, handcuffs, etc., tasers, disproportionately against black people than white people. So it's really showing that those systemic failures, those structural failures are still there and are not being addressed. And the senior officers are in denial and they're trying to tell people everything's fine. And it's far from that. And that's where I believe there needs to be independent oversight of the police service. Similar to when the McPherson inquiry and the recommendations were rolling out, we had the independent oversight of the Stephen Lawrence steering group, because what gets measured gets done. And we really need to show progress. And we can't just leave it down to the police. Because in all honesty, John, if I was asked to join the police now, I would have to really reconsider, even though 30 odd years earlier, in 1983, I was more than happy to join. It was tough, but I was more than happy to join.
I can hear the Met saying, look, hang on a minute. We had a race disparity inquiry and it was independent.
The head of that commission, Tony Sewell, has already made it known for years he does not believe in institutional racism. He doesn't believe in systemic failures. He doesn't even believe in unconscious bias. He doesn't even believe in conscious bias. So he's already made that known. And if you've got the head person saying that, he will choose, handpick all the people he wants to be on that commission and then pump out this report that has created an outrage. And of course, this has set back racial inequality for decades.
Leroy Logan, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.